Hello, welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho. Join me from his home in Arlington, Virginia is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, ndugu Paul.
How are you?
I remain simple, easy, and as some of my fans have suggested, an awesome son of Mother Africa.
Let's get to the politics at hand. Let's start in West Africa. The presidents of Guinea, Alpha Conde, Ivory Coast, Alassane Ouattara, are seeking a third term. The governing party in Guinea has asked President Alpha Conde to seek a controversial third term in office, and after weeks of speculations. The same in Ivory Coast, the incumbent president Alassane Ouattara has announced that he is going to seek a third term. Shaka, these are very, very interesting developments considering what we have been witnessing in some of these countries.
There is nothing new here, really. As a matter of fact, I recall one of my friends, Ghanaian African professor, George Aite himself. He once said that when you think about African independence from European powers, what really happened was that the vehicle they inherited remained the colonial vehicle. And so, according to him, all we did really was merely change drivers, when in fact, what is supposed to be changed is to change the vehicle, the infrastructure.
You make a greater point here, especially in both countries. In 2019, last year, there were a lot of protests when the current President Alpha Conde fronted the idea of changing the constitution and lifting those term limits. At 82 years old, what does he really need in power? Why does he need that power so much that he should be out there taking care of his great-grandchildren? But he wants power.
You are right, but you see, unfortunately for you, you are really trying to be what someone would characterize as logical. This is not about logic, Ndugu. When it comes to greed, greed has no logic. So you are looking at an individual here in terms of age. He will probably tell you that age is merely a statistic, that age is merely a state of mind, that you shouldn't actually worry about it. And a part of it is very simple. Apart from greed, you know as well as I do, I have had the dubious privilege, and in fact, in some cases, the honor and privilege of interacting with some of African leaders and rulers. And I was, in fact, one day put in confidence by one of those former leaders. And I insist here that this was a leader because this was a man that was elected by his people to the office of president. And he was elected under a constitution that observed a 2-term limit. Each of the terms was 5 years. You know, what is interesting is that all these presidents, leaders or rulers, as some will say, they actually, when they come to office, they swear an oath. And if they are Christians, for example, they put the right hand on the Bible and swear to protect, defend, and preserve the Constitution. But when it comes time to go, if they are greedy, basically all they do what is called political maneuver. They push for the amendment of certain clauses, in some cases that are even constitutionally entrenched. And their argument is that they are not your normal type of leaders or rulers. And their supporters will actually support them by saying, no, we have a uniquely gifted individual here who a country cannot do without. And because of that, we should amend the Constitution. And they are right, because there's no reason why you cannot amend the Constitution. Because I may not have gone to law school, but I know that the Constitution is a living document. So it can, in fact, be amended so long as the amendment is a reflection of the interests of the people of that particular republic. But when it comes to an amendment that has the potential of benefiting an individual personally or politically, then I think even the African Union needs really to come on board. Just in the same way, by the way, Ndugu Paul, Africa used to have problems of military coups. You had generals stepping in like Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida of Nigeria, Sani Abacha. They would basically, deploy their soldiers in Abuja, and they become presidents. There are even situations where they were sergeants in Liberia.
Sergeant
Samuel Doe of Liberia, who was in charge of the bodyguard protecting the head of state. He basically stormed in the heads of state's bedroom, killed him and others around, and went to the nearest radio station. In fact, the nearest radio station at that point in time was the only one in the entire Republic of Liberia, and announced that there had been a coup. This was the new dawn. The man actually took over, promoted himself from sergeant or master sergeant to general, and he also became a doctor to boot. You had Lieutenant Colonel Fode Sanko in Sierra Leone. These are people that at one time were dominating African political, the African political scene. But you know what? You no longer hear those type of stories. And the reason is very simple, Ndugu. The African Union and the international community agreed that they are not longer going to tolerate any particular sergeant, whether it be a colonel, a captain, a major, a general, to seize power. They are no longer going to do business with that particular individual. When have you, in fact, last heard of a military coup in Africa? The national community decided.
Most recently in Mali.
In Mali, but how long did it last?
Yeah, Central African Republic.
But he did not have a recognition. You are not recognized by international community. The international community is not going to do normal business with you.
We had a coup in Egypt.
That is true, but
yes.
You know what? In fact, in fairness to the African Union, when it came to Egypt, the African Union suspended membership of Egypt until they were, at least in their view, democratic elections.
No, but I think that's hypocrisy, because currently, who is the chairman?
I think what I'm saying, the argument here is very simple. If you can no longer do or allow for military coups to essentially become legitimate in Africa, you should also include these individuals who swear an oath to defend, protect, and preserve a document called the Constitution, unless and until that amendment is within the interests of the country. But if it is in the political interests of the individual, it should never be allowed to stand. A particular president told me part of the reason they actually change or are tempted to change constitution so they can hang on in the State House is because of what he said. The issue of presidential aura And I have actually been around a lot of presidents. You should see some of their hangers on, some of those aides of theirs, the way they behave around the president. They benefit enormously from having unfettered access to an individual who has limitless power. A former president once told me, "Shaka," he said, "Shaka, if you want to go to Nairobi or London, you first of all have to check or cross-check on your bank account to find out whether in fact you do have the money to buy a ticket. And then you have in fact to go through the motions of buying a ticket. You also have to go through the motions of making sure that you book a hotel. You are in charge of your own logistics. But if you are a president, you don't have to worry about those things. As a matter of fact, you don't even know or remember when next you are supposed to be downtown Paris or New York. It is some of the aides who will come to remind you. You don't have to worry. All you have to essentially do is to prepare yourself for the trip.
Let's go to Emmanuel here, who says, Shaka, you absolutely make a greater point. Now we are dealing with more sophisticated politicians, highly educated individuals who circumvent their constitutions and to change or to rewrite those constitutions. So he particularly gives an example of Alassane Ouattara in Ivory Coast. Alassane is arguing that the 2 terms he has served do not fall under the new constitution, which was adopted, I think, in 2016, which means the 2 terms that he served, as far as is concerned, did not count as far as the new constitution is concerned. So these are the kinds of leaders that we are dealing with. Highly sophisticated, highly educated individuals who can, who take their citizenry or their citizens for fools.
I think we are right, and they in fact probably have a right to think that the people they in fact lead are fools. Because it is interesting that you even call them citizens. If they were citizens, sincerely, those types of things would not happen on their watch. Because citizenship is something very variable. If you are a citizen, it means that you owe your allegiance to the state. And in which case, you actually do have constitutional rights to boot. You have constitutional rights, which in some cases, in fact, may be referred to as inalienable rights, or even birthrights for that matter. And if your constitutional rights are challenged, you organize and mobilize and assert yourselves. When you talk about citizenship, these are not citizens. The people they actually lead, they may be citizens on a piece of paper. But when it comes to the socio-political reality, they are in fact subjects. The reason is simple. Subjects do not have rights. Subjects can essentially wait to get some kind of privilege, which are granted to them by the individual authority that they owe allegiance to. That individual authority may be a king, a queen, maybe an emperor, and in this particular case, it is a president, but in fact, you are talking about a presidential monarch. They even have events that they call elections. These elections, some observers actually have accurately called them out as selections. The reason is simple, because these elections they talk about, they are conducted by the incumbent government, and the incumbent government organizes and in fact conducts those particular elections whose commissioners have been, for example, single-handedly chosen by the incumbent president, who, by the way, also is going to be competing, so to speak, in the political arena, competing against his opponents who actually have their hands tied behind their back and their legs tied together. And so when he punches because he's free and he asks his opponent to punch, his opponent experiences difficulties in punching back. You also have a situation where the results do not reflect the individuals or people who actually went to vote. They do not reflect the will of the people. Rather, they reflect the will of the individual who announces the election results, who, of course, as I said earlier, has been appointed by the incumbent president, who is, for the most part, really competing against himself.
Let's go to, I think, Lillian in Abidjan. Lillian says that perhaps President Alassane Ouattara has forgotten how he came into power. It's exactly this kind of attitude that led to the ouster of former President Laurent Gbagbo, who ended up at The Hague. If this is the kind of thing he wants to do, maybe he has forgotten how he came to power. How do you respond to that?
I think he has chosen to forget. Because, as I said earlier, he is experiencing what I characterized as presidential aura. Surely, by any standard, Ndugu Paul, Alassane Ouattara is a man that I know. We lived together in Washington, D.C. for many, many years. Alassane Ouattara used to come to appear on the Africa Journal television, which used to be hosted by the great, unfortunately late, Maimouna Mills. And I used to be one of the analysts on that television program, the Africa Journal. At that time, Alassane Ouattara was the deputy director of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. I remember when he was in the process of leaving Washington to go back to Abidjan, I remember him telling me that, Shaka, I am going back so that I can be an example to people like you who come from Africa, who live in foreign countries for a very long time, get an education, get experience. So I am going to be an example that, in fact, you can go to the United States like I did, got a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton School of Economics, to boot, and can, in fact, become a prime minister of Ivory Coast under Houphouët-Boigny, who died in the 90s. And later, because there were some political problems that did not end up in his favor to be president, and because Alassane Ouattara was somebody the French liked very much, he behaved and ate and dressed like one of them. And you know, the French colonial policy was called assimilation. So long as you could assimilate, you would become French. Because for them, they said, you are basically like us. The only difference is that it is your culture which is inferior. And in fact, even during colonialism, the French, differently from how the British went about doing their thing, they had Africans who held senior government positions in Paris. And the founding president of Ivory Coast, Houphouët-Boigny, who, of course, has dubious distinction of having built a Catholic basilica, almost larger than St. Peter's in Rome, built it in his hometown of Yamoussoukro, which he also decided was, in fact, the capital of Ivory Coast. He built universities there without students. He built a basilica in a neighborhood, Zundugu, which was predominantly Muslim. So it seems to me that Alassane Ouattara may really have admired Houphouët-Boigny. I learned a lot from him. Alassane Ouattara is a very highly educated individual. Alassane Ouattara is a very highly experienced individual. Alassane Ouattara is not poor. He is remarkably exposed globally. He's like a global citizen, really. But for Alassane Ouattara, sincerely, to do what he is about to do, which is breaking the law, you are breaking the law.
No, actually not.
For
He's
your
not breaking the law. Because under the current constitution, he can run, technically run, so he's not breaking any law. It's just that he has already served his 2 terms. Now he wants...
You can call it that. You can say that he under the current constitution. How did it come about? He had to break the previous law. Because, mind you, he had already sworn an oath to protect, to defend, and preserve the constitution that helped him to come to power. But he went around it, not because it was necessary for the country, but because of his political greed, because he was not really a guy that was patriotic to the Republic of Ivory Coast, but was basically patriotic to his stomach.
Shaka, let me push back on that.
And his friends.
Let me push back on that. At the beginning of the show, you talked about a constitution, how a constitution is a working document. And yes. Every country, really, it's upon that country to decide what future they want to lead. If the leaders of those countries, the members of parliament, the representatives in those countries, wake up one day and they say, we want to change the constitution. What's wrong with that? Because it's a working document at the end of the day.
No, you have a point, but unfortunately that point is unnecessary because I already made the distinctions. I already made the distinctions that yes, you can change the constitution so long as it is in the interests, reflects the national interests, but not personal and political interests.
But who says it's not? Who says? Because people sat down and agreed to it.
Observers of Ivory Coast have said that, and I don't see any evidence to the contrary. The other thing that we talk about, the party, that the party has in fact requested him to be the presidential candidate. Which party are you talking about? In these circumstances, there is no difference between, for example, the individual who happens to be president and the political party. Because he basically formed this political party and he runs the political party as a personal property. For example, he had anointed a man called Amadou Coulibaly, who had been very close, if not the closest political ally he has had in the last 30 years. The young man was supposed to be the presidential candidate for the ruling party. But the young man got sick at some point and went to Paris. And he was, in fact, so sick that he needed to live only if you could, in fact, make a heart transplant. And that's exactly what happened to him. He was given a heart transplant. And then, last month, in July, he suddenly flew to Paris for some kind of treatment. And guess what? He actually died. But are you telling me that in the political party, the ruling party of Alassane Ouattara, there was only one man, one person sincerely, that had the qualities, or at least that was the kind of person that could stand for the presidency of the Ivory Coast?
You make a great point. When I was a younger kid, I used to hear our president say that power belongs to you. You guys are the future leaders of tomorrow. I remember so many times that I've had that kind of conversation coming from people who are older than us, your generation, Shaka. Uh, you guys always tell us that we are the future leaders of tomorrow. But to some extent, you guys have really not provided the leadership that we as young people who look up to you guys should follow. When it comes to these leaders, you cannot tell me you can be in power for all these years and in the entire country, you can't find somebody really to hand over the baton. So I think it's a failure on your part.
I'm afraid that you make a point, and I agree with you. But you know what? When it comes to power, power is one of those things, sincerely, where you do not find people who are very modest. You do not find easily people who are simple and sophisticated enough, if you will, to play the democratic card. I think when it comes to power, that one, you really have to demand it. You have to demand it or take it, using the available means under the Constitution. But when you reach a point again where these constitutions are not even in fact treated or used or applied as constitutions, then what do you do?
So that's the kind of attitude we are getting, Shaka.
It's very unfortunate. So it is in fact your problem. I think that you have.
What do you mean our problem? You guys haven't given us the mantle, you know? If we are running a relay, you are supposed to hand me the baton and I hand it over to the next person. So if you're saying it's our problem, then that doesn't make a difference between you and the leaders, because the leaders are saying that, hey, wait a minute, no, if you want this thing so bad, you have to come and uproot me out of it. You have to kill me before I give you the thing. Should it be like that, really?
Well, first of all, you are not stupid. You are smart people. You have gone to school. Lots of you have got degrees. Some of you have, in fact, even studied political science. You have studied history. You know the difference between a lie and the truth. You know the difference between talking and actually doing the talk or walking the walk. You are talking about how our generation, from the time you were born, has been telling you, or rather has been in fact talking the talk about how power belongs to you. You are the future leaders. But that this generation has not in fact walked that talk by doing what it's supposed to do, to pass on the baton so that you could in fact walk the walk. When you talk about the changing demographics, you as young people, you are arguably the majority in the population. And if in fact it is an election, and a legitimate election that is free, fair, transparent, verifiable, and credible, and you have the Constitution which talks about one person, one vote, you have the potential to actually take power, not necessarily to seize it, but to take it democratically. But the only thing that you have not been doing is, for example, mobilizing and organizing so that you can actually speak with one voice.
Well, Shaka, we'll leave it at that. This has been a very interesting conversation. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome.